Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and start the webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, those who have joined, advocating for newcomer, immigrant, and multilingual parents and students in the special education process. I am Diana Santiago, and I am an attorney at Mass Advocates for Children, which is a nonprofit organization based in Boston, but we cover the entire state of Massachusetts. And we're an advocacy organization that advocates with and for students, in particular, students who face barriers to education, to overcome those barriers and to change systems so that they better meet the needs of all students in school. And we do that through individual advocacy. We have a helpline. We do trainings like this one for service providers and also for parents. And we do advocacy on the systemic level in school districts, at the state agency level, and also at the legislative level. And I am here today with my colleague, Laura Perez.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here, and thank you for joining us.
And also Amy, our Communications and Development Director.
Hi, everyone. I just want to let everyone know that we'll be breaking for questions throughout the webinar at specific points. And please send them in as they come in mind for you. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your window to submit those questions. If questions come up after the webinar, please email Diana at dsantiago@massadvocates.org. We'll be sending out the email address along with a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar afterwards as well. Also, I just want to let you know that I'll be posting relevant resources in the chat throughout the webinar, so please look out for those. At the end of the webinar, we'll be posting a link to a participant survey, and we would really appreciate it if you could fill it out at the end of the webinar. And it's really important for us to offer the information and resources that are most useful to you, and the survey is where we can get that information, so thank you.
Thanks, Amy. So just kind of by way of introduction, if you're attending this webinar, you care about immigrant children and families, and have been witness to the amazing contributions that they make on a regular basis in our communities. As you also know, this is a population of students and families who've been historically underserved and continue to face significant barriers. Massachusetts is now the home to thousands of newcomer migrant families, many of whom are homeless, staying in hotels and shelters throughout the state, many in school districts that do not have the staffing or experience really to be supporting culturally and linguistically diverse students and families in such significant numbers. As of last Friday, the number of families in the emergency assistance shelter program reached the governor's cap of 7,500 families. And there's now a wait list for new families. And given the wait lists now for the program and winter coming, we can expect that families will be living doubled up and tripled up, and in conditions that aren't really conducive to coming to school and learning. The hardships for families and our work to support them, is sometimes it feels daunting. At the same time, I have to say I'm thrilled for the contributions that I know that these families and their children will make in our state, with their diverse cultural perspectives and their language skills.
So why this webinar for direct service providers? Well, often we get calls to our helpline. As Diana mentioned before, we had a helpline. It's a multilingual helpline. It's free of charge, where many families contact us on a daily basis, and also service providers like you working with families contact our helpline, case managers, social workers, counselors. Many of you are bilingual, and people like you, service providers, are contacting our helpline looking for advice related to their clients on special education matters. You working with the families, you see the barriers as much as we do. You are front and center, helping families advocate for their children. And we receive many calls from service providers like you requesting assistance and resources for the family you work with. We have seen that many of you are very strong advocates for your clients, and we thank you for that. Because of the knowledge that you and training that you have, you can be good advocates for your families. And you're also a great resource of support as they advocate to get the services their children need. Unfortunately, because of our limited capacity, MAC staff can only go to team meetings on a very limited cases. So we want to do what we can to support you in the advocacy that you do for parents and children.
Hey, thanks, Laura. And we're going to ask if Amy, if you could please post the first Jamboard link into the chat. We want to have a better sense of who you all are, and the nature of your work with immigrant families. So if you could please go to the chat, we're going to paste a Jamboard link into the chat that will ask, and you can just click on the link to describe the context in which you are working with immigrant or multilingual families. And if you haven't done this before, there's on the left-hand side, there's a little Post-it sticky note. You can select sticky note and pick your color, and then just write a little bit about the context you work with, in which you're working with immigrant or multilingual families. If you're, let's say, working in the emergency assistance shelter system, if you are a teacher, if you're an advocate, just, briefly kind of in what context you're working with immigrant or multilingual families and newcomer families. So we have a middle school social worker supporting family resource centers, especially their school staff, an advocate or an attorney representing students in schools, a patient navigator at Boston Medical Center. We love you at Boston Medical Center. Case manager for many of the HHPs in the area. I probably should know what that is, but I'm not sure what that is. Currently a volunteer at a shelter site to provide mental health support. Case management for Ukrainian refugees, Boston's Higher Ground, Hi MOSIC, and board member of MIRA, Mass Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. This is so great, just seeing the range of experience here that we have in the room. Bilingual special education advocate, director of Patient Information Center at Chelsea Public Schools. Great. Thank you everyone so much for sharing in the chat. It's good to know that you're in, who's in the room. And again, thank you for your interest in this topic.
Okay, so as we continue, here is an overview of the workshop, divided into steps that represent the special education process. Throughout each of these steps, we will emphasize the important role of parents for their children to access the services they need. and tools that parents with limited English proficiency can use to access services their children need. Many of you may know that the monarch butterfly is often used as a symbol of solidarity with immigrant communities. This particular image that we see here was designed by Luis Rafael, a dreamer from Chicago, and he was 22 years old at the time that this was produced. As Amy said before, we will stop for questions after each of the sections, but please do send them using the Q&A button as they come to mind, and Amy will compile them as we go. So who are our immigrant families and multilingual learners in Massachusetts? Well, we know that the immigrant families in the state come from 163 different countries of origin. The newcomers in shelters are primarily from Haiti, and most recently for South and Central America. And overall, 71 school districts in the state of Massachusetts have newcomers who are in the emergency assistance shelter program.
Thanks, Loudon. Here we have our first poll. Amy, if you could please launch poll number 1. What is the primary language of most of the newcomer families you're working with? Interesting. So we'll just give it another couple seconds. Okay, and I'll end the poll. But it looks like, well, I'm afraid to press it because it might go away, but I'll just say, so we have the majority Spanish speaking, 38% Haitian Creole, 30% Haitian Creole and Spanish, 22% Portuguese, 8% Pashto, 2% Vietnamese. And I'm sorry, I did not put an other category, another in this poll, but I know that there are many other languages that you may have of the families with which you may be working.
Yep.
So I'll just,
We have Chinese, Cambodian, Ukrainian, and Russian, and Khmer.
Oh, okay. Great.
Thank you, everyone. So this next slide shows some of the many challenges that immigrant families may face when they come to the US and to Massachusetts. So many of you, I'm sure, have seen many of this, like family separation, homelessness, interrupted education, economic and social factors, systemic racism. So many of this, and we know that there are so many other more that we're not listing here. I'm sure this slide doesn't include all of them, and I'm sure you might have seen others in the work that you do with families. Also, these challenges vary very widely for each individual student based on their country of origin, based on their race, and some other factors that they have to face. Some examples of what we see in Helpline is a parent who relies on child to communicate with government agencies, to communicate with the different agencies to get services. We have a 7-year-old in his first month in the US after being released from a detention center, has siblings and another parent in their home country. We see the 15-year-old just enrolled in Massachusetts after fleeing war in a home country and not having been in school consistently for the past 3 years. And another example is a student in elementary school who arrived in Massachusetts a few months ago He doesn't speak English. He's frustrated because he can't talk to other kids. He can't socialize. He can't play with other kids. He's frustrated because his teachers don't understand him. And he also has ADHD. And because of all these factors, he's struggling with emotional regulation. So what's happening is that the school is now taking disciplinary actions, suspending the student and sending him to timeout rooms, which is isolating him even further. So just to give you an example of the different struggles that families are facing and the calls that we get into our helpline. I think we have another Jamboard.
Yes, we have our second and last Jamboard. Amy, if you could please post it in the chat. And the question for this one is to help us get a sense of kind of what you're seeing. This is an ever-evolving situation for families and students. But what barriers are you seeing or hearing about now for newcomer students to access education and special education in Massachusetts schools? So again, yes, language, homelessness.
Yeah, and while people feel the Jamboard, I wanted to emphasize that, many of these barriers, the schools don't see, or sometimes they fail to see how all these trauma and challenges can affect how the child is learning, how they're socializing, how it impacts their emotional well-being. So, something always to keep in mind when we're working with immigrant families, that many of these factors can be present and are not necessarily being addressed in school.
Yeah, so we have a few: homelessness, navigating the bureaucracy regarding enrollment, evaluations in their language, knowledge of systems and deadlines, lack of knowledge about navigating US systems, trust and fear, parents who don't know their rights or how the special education system works, lack of ELL teachers, bilingual evaluators, and school specialists. Basic needs aren't being met, fear of deportation, all language and limitation of family engagement, cultural stigma, parents struggling with the diagnosis. Thank you, everyone, for sharing these. And we will, as we go through, this is, some of these topics could be covered across many webinars and go beyond even the arena of education or special education, which is part of what is so complicated now about supporting newcomer students and families. So thank you, everyone, for adding to the Jamboard. Okay, so now we will get into immigrant and multilingual parents and students with disabilities, rights, and education. And we hope that this is information that you can use in your advocacy and support for immigrant and multilingual children, and that you can share with families as well. So, as many of you may know, in the United States, we have a federal right to public education. And this is regardless of immigration status, English learner status, or disability. And this right stems from the right for immigrants to public education, regardless of their immigration status, comes from Plyler v. Doe, a Supreme Court decision in 1982. Lau v. Nichols, a court decision from 1974, establishes the requirement to provide English language education to overcome language barriers to learning under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or the IDEA, establishes the right to a free and appropriate public education for students with disabilities. And under Massachusetts law, there also exists a right to public education under Massachusetts special education statute, also referred to as Chapter 766. It's the right to special education, the Learning Opportunities for Our Kids Act, or the LOOK Act, addresses the needs of students who are English learners or multilingual learners, the Massachusetts Student Anti-Discrimination Act, and also there was a Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court decision that stated in reference to the Massachusetts Constitution that to provide an education for all children, rich and poor, in every city and town in the Commonwealth at the public school level is an obligation that we have in our state. And so all of the information that we'll be presenting, or I should say the majority of the information we'll be presenting, stems in some way from these federal and state laws. So another federal law that is relevant in particular to a lot of the newcomer families that we're seeing now in our state who are homeless is our protections under the McKinney-Vento Act, a federal law, which requires same equal access to education for students, including homeless students, and this also includes public preschool programs. McKinney-Vento requires immediate enrollment of students who are homeless, even without records that are normally required for enrollment. So this includes health and immunization records. State to support transportation coordination and other necessary services with the school that's selected by the parent or guardian. So the student has a right, the parent has a right to choose the school district that their child has been enrolled in, even if they're moved out of that district due to homelessness, or they could enroll in the district in which they're sheltered. And same language access requirements, interpretation and translation are required when communicating verbally or in writing with students, if the family requires interpretation or translation. And so now we're going to do our second of 3 polls. Amy, if you could please launch the second poll. Just to know, are you working directly with newcomer migrant families staying in shelters? And we know that some people are kind of there on the ground, providing maybe interpretation, translation services, providing food, helping with immigration paperwork, navigating the housing system, and other people are kind of working at a more policy level. So we have about 55%. I'll end and I'll share the results. So 55% yes.
Half and half. Oh, sorry. I pressed the wrong button here. Okay, thank you, Diana. This is, the timeline of the special education process, and I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this process. So for this webinar, we will be focusing on aspects of the process that explicitly intersect with immigrant and multilingual students and parents' rights. But as always, if you have any questions about this process or any other questions, well, the helpline is always open. If you need any more information, more detailed information about this process. But we know that it starts with a referral, and this is something that we, with all these immigrant families, always, be eyes open in case, a child is struggling beyond just the language barrier. If there is there might be other learning challenges, then any of you, the families, or any of you working with the family, with the child, can do a referral. And then once the referral is made, then the school asks for parent written consent to evaluate the child. and they should send this consent form within 5 school days. Again, many of our families do not know that the school cannot make evaluations without their consent. And we know that sometimes getting this paperwork to the families is complicated because they're in a shelter, they don't have access to technology, or they don't receive the papers and they're not in their language. So just making sure that, you know, the families know that they need to sign the consent form, because otherwise the school will not be conducting the evaluations. We have had in helpline many families calling saying that, yeah, I think they're doing the evaluation because we talked about it. And I need to ask them, did you sign a consent? Because unless they signed a consent, they think the evaluation is being conducted, but it might not. So once the school receives the signed consent form, the school then has 30 school days to complete the evaluation. And these evaluations have to be done every 3 years if the child is found eligible for special education services. Once the evaluation is completed, then the team needs to convene, of course, including the parents. The families have the right to receive a report of the evaluation 2 days, at least 2 days before the team meeting, and in their language. So the reports of the evaluations have to be translated and sent to the family 2 days before that team meeting. And that team meeting, again, if the child is eligible for IEP services, then the team needs to reconvene once a year. And then we will be talking more in detail about the team meeting in the next slide. After the team convenes or meets, then a new IEP will be developed, or a first IEP will be developed. And within 45 days, then the family should expect to receive that IEP. And then the family has 30 days to respond to the IEP. And I want to clarify here that they don't have to respond to the IEP until they receive the IEP in their preferred language. We know that, you know, what the law says is the family should be receiving the IEP both in English and their preferred language. But what happens is reality is that translated IEP usually takes a few more days for the family to receive it. So it is important for the families to know that they don't have any obligation to sign the IEP until they have had a chance to read it in their preferred language. And the 30 days, they don't start counting until that IEP is sent in their preferred language.
Okay, and that's really like in the best case scenario, it's going to be a few days. That's how it should be. After the English version of the IEP is issued, then it should be issued. The translation should be issued in the parent's primary language. Unfortunately, we often see that it either doesn't come, the translation doesn't come, or it takes, 2 or 3 months for the translated IEP to come, and it really isn't. Sometimes it does require some persistence and advocacy with the school district to ensure that IEP is issued in the parent's language. And with a lot of our newcomer families, I mean, they are not even going to know what an IEP is, the importance of the IEP, that it's their signature on the IEP is required before the school district can implement. So that even, implement those services, that really base level of course information is so important to share with families. And if there are any questions at all about, what if something is going as it should be or shouldn't be, there's, parents who are pressured to sign documents that aren't in their language or that they don't understand. Really, please feel free to reach out to Mac's helpline, which we'll put that information in the chat for helpline, and it's also at the end of this webinar.
The next step is, the parent we wanted to talk about parent participation, and the law indicates that the parents are equal team members, and we know that because of the different cultural backgrounds of our families, they might feel intimidated when they meet with the team. They might feel that their voice is not, it's more important, the voice of the school psychologist or the special education teacher. But it is really important for families to know that they're equal team members of that team, and then their voice it's extremely important there, and it's actually one of the most important voices in the team, because they know their kids better than anyone. They're the true and only experts on their kids, and they should know that, you know, that it is important for them to voice their concerns and their visions for their children. Because they are equal members of the team, they need to have access to every letter, emails, documents, access to understanding what is happening in meetings. And so the districts are obligated to translate any document, any email, any communication that goes to the family, and they need to provide qualified interpreters for that meeting. At the same time, again, the school cannot make any changes to an IEP, conduct any evaluations, or make any decisions without the parent's consent. And the parent response is needed to proposed IEP and placement. What we see in helpline in general is, you know, the quality of the interpreters sometimes is not, you know, it's not enough, and the parents have a hard time understanding what is happening at the meetings. Important here is that, and thank you, Diana, for changing to the next slide, that the interpreters must be qualified interpreters. This means interpreters that are trained in the ethics of interpretation, including confidentiality and the role of the interpreter in the meeting. We see many times that schools are bringing in another teacher who speaks, who's bilingual, or another staff member who's bilingual, but these are not qualified interpreters, and the school should be providing a qualified interpreter. Another thing that we see a lot in helpline is I talk to parents sometimes, and they say, oh, I need to send this email to the school, but I'm going to wait for my older son to come and translate it for me. Or I'm going to wait for my brother to come and translate this for me. And I always emphasize with the families that they don't need to have any emails, any communication with the school translated. They have the right to send any emails in their preferred language or any letters in their preferred language, and the school is the one responsible to translate those documents.
And at MAC, we have a lot of template. Oh, sorry, Laura.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, we have a lot of the template letters in English and in Spanish, because a lot of, so if the parent, for example, a request for an evaluation, which is always important to send in writing if there are concerns about the student. We'll talk in a little bit more depth about that. But we have the letters available through our helpline and on our website in English and in the parent's primary language, so that they can complete those, or a service provider working with the family can help to complete those, to submit them. Amy, I think if you haven't already dropped in the chat, there are a couple of fact sheets that outline this information that are from the U.S. Department of Education, Office for Civil Rights, that are multilingual fact sheets about the rights of English learner students and parents with limited English proficiency. I also just want to put in a plug for a bill that MAC is advocating for, the Qualified School Interpreters in Education Settings bill, which would create a system for training qualified school interpreters according to a lot of the requirements that Laura emphasized when she was talking, that unfortunately in schools, unlike in medical settings and in court settings, oftentimes are not trained at all as interpreters, never mind, in the specialized terminology and the importance of keeping sensitive, well, all information confidential. If you are seeing that this is not happening, that parents are not receiving translated documents, or the school district is not providing trained interpreters for when communicating with families, an option is to file a complaint with the State Department of Education problem resolution system. And we put the website here to do that. There's a form online available in multiple languages. It's a 60-day process to file a complaint with PRS. So it can often be faster to really, advocate with the school district. And, it's always good to communicate anyway, of course, with the school district before filing a complaint. It's not a requirement that happen, but if a lot of times we'll get calls to our helpline where things are just stuck, the parent or a service provider has been persistent in reaching out to the district. The parent still isn't getting what they need, and the student as a result is losing out. And so we would recommend filing with PRS on language access and other issues related to compliance. So here we're going to stop for a second for questions. So Amy, maybe we could do like two or three questions that are.
Yes, we have a lot of questions, good questions in the Q&A. We can start with the first question. In the McKinney-Vento Act, how do they define homelessness? Do they include families that are couch surfing?
Yes, they do. And I don't have the act kind of in front of me. So to say, and I'm a lawyer, so I see the words in front of me. But there should be, so I can follow up with that. But families who are kind of in couch surfing would qualify as homeless under McKinney-Vento.
The next question is, what if the translated IEP is not received for over 3 weeks or more? What happens?
So yeah, and unfortunately, this is all too common. Writing everything in writing, and as a lot of times parents who are, have very young children, are homeless, food insecure, all the factors that were in that kind of chart that Laura described earlier in the webinar can get in the way of parents really being able to advocate with the school district. But it is important to have that, document in writing. The parent is waiting for the translated IEP. Services can't be implemented until then. And if they're really not getting anywhere, or if you're working directly with the family, aren't getting anywhere, you can contact MAC. I'd suggest doing that. And through our helpline, we can provide some information about next steps. And one of those next steps, depending on the specific circumstances, may be to file with the problem resolution system. Sometimes, in some very limited cases, we're able to, as MAC, kind of reach out to the school district, just send a quick email like, look, it's been 3, can you just, and sometimes that can be effective, but we aren't all, it kind of depends on our capacity to be able to get involved, because oftentimes it's not going to be just limited to that one thing. But so that's if things are stuck, then yeah, the problem resolution system, and then at least there's a third party involved who can communicate with the district on the issue.
Next, I think this could be a quick question, so maybe we can do 4, but many families do not know these laws, and how can we do a better job in educating families? Is there someone like a family partner that we can make available to explain how the IEP process works?
Yes, great question. And that's, MAC does trainings for families also that are a lot more, the information is a lot more basic than what we're presenting here today. for families, just to know very basic rights. And then we emphasize that they can contact the helpline if they have questions going forward. One of the areas, the reasons that we do these trainings for service providers, including family partners, I love that idea. We would love to do a training for family partners. And I'm sure there are many family partners right here in the Zoom webinar room. You know, who are, you know, getting this information and can pass it on to families. Because in particular, when families have so many stressors and just their life circumstances are really just, you know, really difficult in so many ways. It can be hard, something like, you know, sending a letter to the school district, having information in writing, knowing that if your child is struggling in school, that, you know, that you have a right to request an evaluation if you suspect it may be because of a disability that impacts their learning. Those, you know, kind of very basic rights. So it's a lot. It's ongoing too. So it's, you know, I love that idea though of, you know, a training for kind of family partners. And this is kind of intended in that spirit, if I can say that, to really provide this basic information to pass on to families.
Yeah, and I wanted to add also, Diana, that the helpline is not a one-time thing. So if the family feels comfortable reaching out directly, they are welcome to call helpline as many times as they need, with as many questions as they have. And we know that navigating this school can be difficult, especially navigating special education process, and families usually called one time with one question and they follow up and they go to the team meeting and they call again with another question after the team meeting. So helpline is there to provide that hand-holding for families who need a little bit more of guidance and understanding of the process.
Do we have time for one more question or should we move on?
Let's do one more.
Okay, so I'm gonna lump these questions. We're getting some around, you know, qualified interpretation. There was one in the chat asking, does qualification include understanding of special education language? And then we're getting some questions around how can someone be trained as an IEP interpreter or get training to do this work altogether?
Again, great questions. Yes, training for the interpreter does include training in the specialized terminology that's used in the context, including special education or student discipline, you know, whatever that context is. And that fact sheet from the United States Department of Education, Office for Civil Rights, does outline that specific, you know, terminology used in that particular setting. There are the State Department of Education, or the DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, is actually developing a training curriculum that the first parts of it have already rolled out, that is specific to educational settings. And you, on the DESE website, and maybe we can include this in the follow-up materials to this webinar also, but there's a video, 90-minute video for school district staff who are bilingual on just very basics. It's not really a school interpreter training in 90 minutes, because really interpretation is a very, you know, it requires a lot of skill and practice and, you know, learning to be able to do, but it kind of includes some of the basics. And then in some school districts, they are rolling out the training for school interpreters. So we're really excited about that initiative that DESE is undertaking. And I don't think that they've yet rolled out the special education version, because that's really more advanced in terms of the specialized terminology. But that will be coming if it hasn't already been released, in terms of school interpreter training. So if anybody is interested in that, feel free to reach out to me, and I can connect you. I can either find out for you or connect you with who you would need to be connected with at DESE to be able to take advantage of some of those trainings. But that is in process. It's just it will take a little time, but it's exciting, really, that it is rolling out. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Okay, so now we're really gonna get into the meat here of special education for multilingual learners. And hopefully we'll be touching on a lot of the issues that you're seeing in the field. And the first topic really relates to referral and evaluation. So referral for special education and special education evaluations. And there are some very basic rights that students have under special education law. School districts are legally required to identify students with disabilities in a timely way. So it's not okay to say, okay, we're going to wait for 2 years because this student is an English learner. And even though there's an indication, maybe because of records, from the student's home country or the parent report of that child's learning experiences in their home country, the school has some reason to suspect that the student may have a disability, or maybe it's what's in front of them, what they're seeing, that it doesn't seem that some behaviors or challenges in terms of making progress academically, socially, or emotionally appear to be something more than language. The school district is required to identify students who may have a disability. It's not the wait and see approach because of other factors is not appropriate at all. And when a student is referred for a special education evaluation, the testing must be done in the form, including the language, that's most likely to accurately assess what the child knows and can do academically, developmentally, and functionally. So if the student requires testing in their language, then the school district must provide testing in their language. And if there aren't testing instruments that are normed for the population that student is part of, culturally and linguistically, then the school district has to figure it out, doing informal testing, maybe like developing a series of testing, or there's some instruments that don't require language, so you can get some information using those instruments. But you can't say, I mean, I heard from somebody who called our helpline, it's too hard. Okay, no, because the family was refugee family, not a common language in Massachusetts, and it was hard. Like, it is hard. It is, especially in some of these school districts that they're just not used to serving English learners and their families. So it's even more new, but it's really suspected disability needs to be figured out. That student needs to be assessed and identified if they have a disability. Testing, I think I already kind of touched on that, must take into account cultural and linguistic differences. So, the typical example is kind of, maybe not using a scenario during testing about a snowy day, for a student who's from Haiti or the Dominican Republic, because that's biased. I mean, they're going to have to kind of overcome their knowledge of or not, unfamiliarity, lack of familiarity kind of with that context. And it could skew kind of the testing results, but there are a lot of other examples. And then when there are concerns about disability related behaviors, an option can be to request a functional behavioral assessment, which is an assessment that looks at the kind of antecedents or what happens right before the behavior that might be triggering the behavior, but just better understand what's going on. And this is also can be really useful in identifying, what what may be triggering a behavior in students and how they can better be supported in the classroom. It also offers some protection in the event of student discipline. If there is down the road, the behavior continues to escalate, results in school exclusion, then it can be helpful to have the record that this FBA was requested. There was a suspected disability. So that's something to keep in mind. There, in addition to special education evaluations, school districts do English language proficiency assessments. And this is evaluation and progress monitoring that happens for all identified English learners or multilingual learners, regardless of whether they are identified as having a disability. In Massachusetts, they use the access testing. And there are some different testing instruments that are used for early childhood English learners. The multilingual nonverbal communicators, due to autism or intellectual disability or another disability, must also be assessed. So it's not enough for school. Oh, we couldn't assess their English language proficiency because they're mostly nonverbal, due to the student's autism. That student, the testing doesn't just look at verbal, it looks at receptive language, also reading, writing, all of these areas. And this is another thing, that is not a reason for a student not to be assessed. And unfortunately, we have seen cases where the school district, I think they just didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to do, so they just didn't assess the student. And that's really not an approach to take for a student who may require English language education supports. There is this alternative access for ELs, but it's really reserved for students with significant cognitive disabilities. So it's fewer than 1% of students who take the access should be given the alternative access for ELs. Now this is Laura's slide.
So, as we know, there are many instances when the parent disagrees with the school evaluation, and it's always very important to know that families have the right to request a second opinion through an independent educational evaluation. And the family can request district funding, especially protections for, we have special protections for low-income families. And this option is very helpful for immigrant students who may not have health insurance that funds private evaluations. So there's always the option of requesting the independent evaluation at the district's expense. And if you need, we have as Diana was saying before, we have sample letters and multilingual letters for families to request the independent evaluation. So please do not hesitate to call our helpline if you need any of these sample letters. We'll be happy to send them to you. But yeah, this is an option. Many of the families contacting helpline, they do not know that there's an option. We have families either in long wait lists waiting for Children's Hospital or for BMC for independent evaluation, thinking it's the only option they have. But it is important to know that the families always have the option to request that second opinion at the district expense.
And, related to this, we do at MAC, we have a list of evaluators who accept the rate setting rate. I know that school districts offer, they are required to pay, for independent evaluations. A challenge that we run across all the time is the limited availability of multilingual evaluators. And this is part of the reason why I am just so excited about our newly arrived families and our, immigrant population in Massachusetts, our young immigrant population in Massachusetts, because it's so needed. And translators and interpreters, there is a way to conduct evaluations. Obviously, it's not ideal. I mean, the evaluation in the student's language is, that's the kind of the gold standard, if it can be done. In other cases, some interpreters have experience working with interpreters and translators, but it's definitely a barrier for students to be adequately assessed, is just a limitation.
So for the special education team meeting, and this is a one where you can be very extremely helpful, supporting the family and helping the family prepare for that team meeting. What we see from families contacting us is that they sometimes they haven't even read the evaluations yet, or they have read the evaluations, but they're really not prepared to go to that team meeting, which makes it a lot more overwhelming and hard to process and understand. So as many of you know, the process of the special education team meeting is to discuss any evaluations and to talk about the student progress in all areas, not only academic. And this is important to emphasize that the team meeting needs to address the development of the child in all areas: academic, social, emotional, functional, and even transition, right, if the child is older than 14. DESI has a new guidance that suggests a pre-meeting with parents, especially those parents that are not familiar with the U.S. school system. So extra support for the families before they go to that first team meeting, to meet with the families, explain to them what to expect at the meeting, what's going to happen at the meeting, who's going to be there, what's their role in the meeting, how do they prepare for the meeting. And so that first team meeting is not as overwhelming for them. Important too, the scheduling must include the parent. We know that many of our families, they work more than one job sometimes, and their availability is very limited, but the school needs to make every effort to accommodate to the parent's schedule. And also, well, for our families to know that they can invite anyone with knowledge of the student to the team meeting. And this is when you can, go with them to team meetings. You work with the children at the home, and you can add, a lot of your observations to that meeting. And even somebody who can be there just as emotional support. Our families sometimes feel very isolated, being new to this country. So just having that other person with them at the meeting that can help them take notes, can help them just emotionally be a support system for them. And again, the qualified interpreter. And this, what we've seen many times is that team meetings are usually an hour long, and they don't provide any other more time when an interpreter is used. So it's important to request that the team meeting is longer than an hour, and they provide that extra time if an interpreter will be present or is necessary or is needed at the meeting, because we know that most likely that's going to lengthen the time that we need to really finalize that meeting. And another aspect where you can be very helpful helping the families preparing for that meeting is to have help the families write their concerns. Think about what are they worried about from every point of view, not only in school, but in the community. Is the child adapting? Is the child making friends? How's the child doing at home? Is he eating okay? Is he sleeping okay? How's the child processing all this immigrating into, to Massachusetts? So it's really important for the families to write all their concerns and send them to the team in preparation for the meeting, and letting the team know what their concerns are, what specific questions they have prior to the meeting, which is a big role that you can play in this piece of the process.
Thanks, Laura. And just, one last point about the team meeting. This is the place where the IEP is being developed, and it is the U.S. Department of Education and Department of Justice have stated explicitly that it is essential that the IEP team include participants who have knowledge of the student's language needs and how to differentiate between the student's needs stemming from a disability or the lack of English language proficiency. So I go to a lot of team meetings, and it's often the case where it's unclear who among the members of the team are kind of there to speak, from the perspective of, having this knowledge of the student's language needs. It is so important, and it's a very valid question to ask at the beginning of the meeting. This is an English learner, who here is here, to kind of fill that purpose and be able to really speak knowledgeably about the impact of the student's language, being an English learner on their disability, and vice versa. And so that's just an important point. And we have our third and last poll. So Amy, if you could launch the third poll, and it's for those who have, for those who have attended team meetings, to what extent are the English language needs of students you are supporting addressed?
Yeah, and while people fill the poll, there is a question in the chat about the rates for independent evaluations, saying that the school have their own rate, and PRS said that they're not in charge of reinforcing the rate that was established by health department.
Really? Call the helpline, and I hope that's in writing. School, that's like the base rate. We can talk. I mean, I'm surprised. I guess I should say I'm surprised. I would say that the school district is required to, but we should talk, because there might be some differences in the particular circumstances, because there's some time frame issues and income eligibility issues. So but I'm really interested to hear more. So
yeah, but the school doesn't set the rates for independent evaluations.
No, they don't. They're set by they're set by law. They're regulations that set the rates. Okay, so we have, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So we have, to a large extent, 12%, to some degree 20%, not very much 22%, and not at all 5%, or I don't know, 41%. Okay, so thank you for that. That's interesting information regarding the team meetings. And I believe that we are going to ask, and maybe we can do like 2 questions, and then there'll be an opportunity again to ask questions at the end.
Okay. So there are some questions around accommodations for parents. Can accommodations be made for parents who aren't able to read? And what can a caregiver do when they've signed an IEP in the past, but they don't think it's enough? I guess those are separate questions, but.
Okay, so accommodations for parents who don't read or write in, I'm assuming, any language. Yes, the school district there are accommodations that can be made. The parent can ask for the team meeting to be recorded. And there is, and I should have pulled it in the follow-up email. I can pull where it due to disability, if the parent has kind of a disability that's kind of impacting their participation in the meeting or their ability to retain information in the meeting, but that would be a suggestion for if a parent doesn't read or write in any language, to do that, to ask to record the team meeting. The parent can also ask for the school district to kind of review the IEP, with them before signing it. It's not something that most school districts are going to proactively offer for families. So that's another place where I think as family support providers and direct service providers that that you can really offer in terms of kind of helping them maybe to go to the school district and set up a meeting to review the IEP in particular, or review the evaluations that have been done for that student. Of course, that pre-meeting with the families that DESE has suggested now in their guidance surrounding the new IEP, could be a good way for the parent to gain information. But I think with literacy barriers, it's just going to take more kind of contact and more touches before it, for any parent, regardless of all of it, so many factors. It's a daunting process. I'm a special education attorney, and I'm still learning all the time, and advocating for my own kids, in the process is challenging for me. And so you can imagine a family brand new to the country, language literacy barriers, just how much that is. And I think just the more kind of touches with people who can support the family, the better. We're a resource at MAC. If the family has, wants a review of the IEP, or wants us to, they can call the helpline, and we can, we can answer questions related to the IEP, or maybe connect them with other resources. So those are kind of all options. And I don't remember the second question, Amy. Sorry.
Oh, what can a caregiver do when they've signed an IEP in the past, but they don't think it's enough?
So if it's been in the recent past, and we're actually going to be talking about the IEP now, so I wonder if that question will be answered. But the short answer is that the parent can withdraw their consent of the IEP and reject it, in part for not including whatever it is that the parent thinks it should include. And independent evaluations are extremely helpful for knowing what should be in the IEP that is not in the IEP. So they can withdraw their acceptance and ask that it be replaced with a partial rejection of the IEP. And they could also ask if it, they can also ask for a team meeting. If they're seeing that the IEP is not sufficient or adequate in supporting that student in their learning, they can ask the team to convene for a progress meeting, discuss any changes that may be needed for the IEP, maybe additional evaluations that need to be done. That's just another option that the family has in that case. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the IEP for English learner students or multilingual students, and I use them interchangeably. The law hasn't really caught up. The law still refers to students with limited English proficiency as ELs, English learners. But I do appreciate that in so many school districts now, they're moving towards a more strength-based language, with the use of the term bilingual English learner students or multilingual students. So I kind of use them interchangeably, but that's just, it's all kind of falls within, is kind of referring to the same population of students. So important thing to have in mind is that the IEP for an English learner or multilingual learner should address both that students' English language education needs as they relate to the students' disability related needs. So there's that kind of in between area where it covers that student's English language education and the student's individualized, specialized instruction or related services that they're getting as a student with a disability. They overlap, and the IEP should fully address that student's dual needs in that in-between area where they overlap. It could be that the student's disability is impacting the student's English language development. Maybe there's a goal in the IEP, you know, where towards the student's English language proficiency, to give one example. Maybe that student requires native language instruction as an English learner with a disability. And you know, and the team makes that decision, the student requires it, you know, based on evaluations, based on information the team has. Those are just some examples. And there was a BSCA decision in 2017, it's a Worcester case, that if a student's English language needs are integrated with their special education needs, those needs must be considered in determination of what is an appropriate education for that student. So they must be integrated into the IEP. So I said, you know, English language education needs infused throughout the IEP where they overlap with that student's disability related needs. In instruction in the student's primary language, there should be, you know, it may be that there are educators who are qualified and experienced in addressing the student's language acquisition and disability related needs, either directly working with that student, maybe it's an ESL licensed educator who has experience working with students with disabilities, or maybe there's a consultation between the special educator and the English, the ESL licensed teacher, just to ensure, again, that those dual needs, where those two areas overlap, that student, the services that they're receiving isn't like separate and apart, which unfortunately it's more often the case in schools that they are not provided in an integrated way. But in the team process, you know, parents can advocate for it, service providers working with families, teachers, you know, can kind of, should always be asking those questions and identifying ways that that student's IEP can support their language development, and that their needs as an English learner are also met in ways that aren't impacting the student's progress in school. One way to, in terms of advocating for native language instruction, can be considering how the skills will be used at home as a basis. So if the student is maybe, you know, limited verbal skills, maybe they use maybe the student has autism, they use an assistive and augmentative communication device, like a tablet for communication. Those apps for AAC apps come in multiple languages. You know, the team should be discussing multilingual versions of the app so that it can be used also at home. And then there's that carryover to home. But really any kind of communication related area that's impacted by the student's disability, in order for there to be carryover to the home, oftentimes that native language component is necessary. So, and somebody had asked about the response to the IEP. The parent can reject the IEP in part if it does not adequately address the English language education needs that are integrated with the student's disability related needs. And oftentimes you can, you know, partially reject. It doesn't mean that magically the school district is going to, I mean, they are going to reconvene, you know, to talk about the partial rejection, which is a step, and you can make sure that there's someone there who can speak to that student's English language acquisition needs. Really, it's going to be important also to pursue an independent education evaluation as kind of a backup in case the school district doesn't fully kind of come along where the parent is in seeing what their student needs. Okay, so we have just a couple of final points before we go to last questions. So special education and student discipline. This is an important area for English learners who in some districts are disproportionately excluded from school through suspensions, informal and formal suspensions. It could also be an entire training that we could do on school to deportation pipeline. Unfortunately, it's something that we see a lot in school districts with large immigrant populations. But students with an IEP, 504 plan, or where there has been a referral for special education. So if you remember back, we were talking about evaluations and the functional behavioral assessment, where there's been a suspected disability in the past. Before that student can be suspended for more than 10 days consecutively or cumulatively, if it's kind of within the same category of behavior, then the district must first have a manifestation determination review meeting, where they'll talk about whether the behavior that led to the exclusion from school stemmed from that student's disability, whether it was a disability related behavior, or whether the behavior happened as a result of the district's failure to implement the student's IEP. So if, let's say the student wasn't, unfortunately, we see sometimes for English learners, who don't have visible disabilities, where the disability is not apparent from the outside of the student, that their IEPs just aren't implemented at all. And then it's not caught that that student's IEP hasn't been implemented until the student falls into trouble, into, maybe physical fights or kind of like talking back, to teachers, or, whatever the case might be, right? Self-regulation issues. And if that's the case, and that failure to implement the student's IEP has resulted in discipline, then there should be an MDR meeting before they can proceed with the process. Something important to have in mind is district is also required to under student discipline regulations, to implement alternatives to exclusionary school discipline. So alternatives to suspension, expulsion before, for nonviolent behaviors or offenses. It's important that the students' English language needs and disability related needs are accommodated in those accommodations, or excuse me, in those alternatives. So if the school is using restorative justice and the student requires accommodations to participate in restorative justice circles or whatever, because they're an English learner, because they have a disability related need that needs to be met in order for them to participate, the district they must meet those needs. We'll mention students with limited or interrupted formal education, or SLIFE students, English learners who have experienced interrupted formal education or have limited formal education prior to enrolling in the district. They're usually at least 2 grade levels behind in reading and math. There's a concern here with over-identification and under-identification of students with a disability. But where there's a suspected disability, the student should promptly be referred for a special education evaluation. And Loud, I'm sorry. I always towards the end, I get I do want to leave some time for questions. Do you want to do this one, Lauda?
Yeah, so some of the issues that to watch for in assessments and IEP development for English learner students. Sometimes the team won't recommend specialized support instruction, like including bilingual education, even though the child's unique needs, because they're not readily available. So we know that districts should be providing any services or support that the child needs, and not necessarily because of availability or sometimes I hear in helpline districts are telling families they don't have the budget, or we don't have that type of support in the school. In other cases, the English learner education needs are often overlooked, and the students are segregated in special education settings, and In other examples, school districts don't access English language proficiency for nonverbal communicators because they just don't know how. And I think Diana mentioned that before. And or there's no communication with the home to learn how the student is accessing languages in different settings. So many of the multiple examples that we see in MAC and we see in Help, and I'm sure you see many of these too with the families you work with.
And these are some dispute resolution options. We've focused primarily on the special education process in this webinar. But there are options if the family has gone through the special education process, the student's been evaluated, they've had the team meeting, the IEP has been developed, the IEP has been rejected or partially rejected. In areas where the parent disagrees, there's been an independent evaluate, so that process has kind of happened. Options, if the issue still is not resolved, include mediation with the Bureau of Special Education Appeals, which is a voluntary process. So the school districts has to also agree with the mediation. And there's an option to file a hearing request with the Bureau of Special Education Appeals, which is a pretty formal process and really would require the support of an advocate or an attorney. I mentioned earlier, the Massachusetts DESE Problem Resolution System, or PRS, which is, they're good, for addressing disputes with school districts. There's a 60-day turnaround time. They're especially good. I mean, they can address any kind of discrimination, bullying, access to free and appropriate public education. And in my experience, it's when they're pretty clear-cut compliance issues is when they're most effective, like failure to translate documents or not complying with the timelines for the special education process. And there are multilingual complaint options on their website. And then there's the U.S. Office of Civil Rights, or the U.S. DOE of the U.S. Department of Education, where if there are the parent is concerned that themselves or their child are being discriminated against because of their national origin or their language, which is kind of proxy for language is kind of a proxy for national origin, under the law, or disability or race, then they may consider filing with the U.S. Office of Civil Rights. And that is 180-day. They look back just 180 days. And it's kind of a longer process than the PRS 60 days. So actually, I'm just going to go through the resources really quickly, and then we'll go to questions because I want to make sure everyone knows. We've talked so much about our helpline. Here's the information for our helpline. And Amy, if you wouldn't mind just putting it in the chat, when you can't do it too many times, put it in the chat. Sample letters for education advocacy here, immigrant rights and education fact sheets. We offer trainings for free for families and for service providers. So if your organization has the need for a training in any of the areas that are indicated here, bullying, transition in special ed, basic rights, navigating the IEP, autism, or student discipline rights, please reach out and we can set up a training. These are some videos we'd encourage you to look at about the special education process, and they're like 3-minute videos about these different aspects of the process in English and in Spanish. These are some legal advocacy organizations, and you will get a copy of the slides. But I just wanted to kind of go over these advocacy resources and education that can be really useful from the state, from the federal government. And Amy, if you wouldn't mind pasting them in the chat, just in case people, I know I always like to paste from the chat into my notes, the resources, and then these additional resources for newcomer families beyond education. And I'll just kind of leave this up here, but I just wanted to highlight some of these resources as well. So why don't we go to our questions? And if you need to leave, I should say, don't forget to fill out our participant survey for the webinar. Please do that. It's so helpful for us to know how we can make this information clearer, better, more complete, less complete, whatever. Really, we really want to know, what's useful to you. So please do take a few minutes. I don't think it's too painful to do the participant survey.
Yep, I just pasted the link to the survey in the chat. Okay, the first question we have right now is, what can a parent do if the school is sending them home or a partial day or pulling them out of a class as a tactic to keep suspensions under 10 days?
Yep, that happens a lot.
Yes, unfortunately. And, first of all, make a note of it, like every time. I don't know if this is a student who has an IEP already, who has a disability, but it may be there's something off when the student needs to be excluded like that because of a behavior or that needs to be figured out. And it may be that an evaluation is warranted. The parent may want to request a functional behavioral assessment or another type of evaluation. If the student hasn't been found eligible for special education, absolutely a special education evaluation. If things are happening that's preventing the student from accessing their education very clearly if the school district can't manage the student, and it's so it lost learning time for the student, clearly an issue. They can convene a team meeting, ask for a team meeting to be convened, and if other things fail, then file with the state, file a PRS complaint. But that's where the documentation comes in, because really for them to see the problem, it's really helpful to say, over the past 3 months, the school has called to pick up my child, more than an hour or two before the end of the school day on 14 days. And, whatever the particular facts are, but that documentation is really important if, things result that there needs to be a PRS. But really, there's something going on. The school district is obligated to figure out what it is so that they can support the student, so that the student can stay in school.
Great. Next question. Many of the families at our local hotel or shelter have young, non-English speaking children, and by young, they mean not old enough for kindergarten. Do these children have any rights to publicly provided preschool? The town currently has a public preschool, but it's only for kids with IEPs, and there's not enough space for all children.
Yeah, so they're entitled to the same thing that other children in their town are entitled to. So if it's only for students with IEPs, that's what's publicly available for preschool options for that district, then they may not be able to access those services. If there are concerns about that child's development, they are entitled to, the parent should make a referral for early intervention. And early intervention, which is a program within DPA, Department of Public Health, they can go to the home, they can do an assessment to determine whether that child's needs early intervention support, which can also help, at the time when the student does become eligible for public preschool, that they could enroll in the public preschool. Head Start is available in a lot of places, so they're but yes.
Great. I'll just quickly reiterate, if you can't find the survey for the trainings, I just pasted the link again in the chat to leave your feedback. And then another question we've gotten from the chat is, this shelter has no overall social worker or person overseeing their well-being or services currently or yet. How can we educate these parents on rights? Or what are some resources they can have access to educate these parents on their rights?
So I've done some presentations like basic rights and education for immigrant and multilingual families in collaboration. I did one with actually up here, the Black Autism Coalition, Cynthia Lane, just on basic rights and education. We actually, this is such a good segue to our, MAC is going to be hiring actually in education. We have the posting out now, an education attorney or advocate who will be working exclusively on advocating with and for newcomer families and children. So we hope to have increased capacity to be able to do more trainings on site at, if there's the one that I did with Cynthia was at a Haitian church that was nearby. But there are other ways to do that if it can be arranged. I mean, we're really, we'll make it work. If there's like a group of parents where we can go and talk to them, and we really aim to make our information very accessible, not too much for what families may be able to ingest or whatever you want to say, because we know that they have so much going on, so many competing priorities in their lives, and which can just affect their capacity to be able to take in information about education. So please reach out if you're, those are just things that come to mind for me that we can offer at MAC, if you'd reach out to us. And we also have flyers. We'll send out our like fact sheet about immigrant rights to all of you. And it includes information about our helpline.
Okay, I know we're at time.
Yep.
Oh, we are at time. Okay, so thank you everybody so much. I'm gonna do you have the job posting link, Amy, that you could put in once more to the chat, just so people have it, and we'll also put it in a follow-up email, but I just want to make sure people see that. Please circulate this job posting. Thank you all so much for all that you're doing, really, on the ground and wherever you are, and for your interest in supporting this really important population of families that will make great contributions to our state. I have no doubt.
Thank you everyone for being here. See you soon. Call our helpline.